So hi everybody, my name's Ryan. I'm from the Saskatchewan Science Centre, and I have a very special interview for you today. I'm joined by John Stiles, a professional engineer. He has an education in petroleum engineering and with more than 35 years of experience in the resource industry. In 2016, he founded Outlaw Trail Distilleries, known for its old Foggy Bottom single malt, which won a Best in Category International Spirits Medal in 2018. Outlaw Trail Spirits and John have both been longtime supporters of the Science Centre, including participating in our fantasy food fundraiser that we do each year. But that's actually not why we're talking today. We're talking today because Outlaw Trail has done something very unique with its business that's really innovative. Welcome, John.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
So would you like to expand a little bit about either your background or perhaps the background of Outlaw Trail Distilleries?
Sure, I'll do both. Spent a lot of time in the oil and gas industry, as you might imagine, with a petroleum engineering degree. And, thinking back on my time and the distillation courses that I took in university, boy, that's a long time to waste a talent where you can make hooch. And so about 7 years ago, we went to visit my brother-in-law in Butte, Montana, and he wasn't quite ready for us, so he kicked us out and told us to go find the distillery, the brand new distillery that was in Butte, which of course was Headframe Distillery. And we went for the tour, had their bar experience. They had this beautiful old 120-year-old bar that they had refurbished. It was about, 60 feet long. It was just this monster bar and very old style. You felt like you were sitting in an 1880s saloon. And then bought a couple of bottles of hooch on the way out, and that experience transformed me. And prior to that, my wife Charmaine and I had been looking for some kind of retirement project to chase. And we must have gone through 100 different franchises that just didn't have any appeal to us. And then suddenly we knew what we were going to do. So we spent the next 4 or so years putting together all of the requisite sourcing of equipment and materials, putting together a business plan. Engineers are nothing if not planners. And bingo bango, 2016 in December, we ended up opening the doors and sold our very first products just prior to Christmas in 2016.
And Outlaw Trail Spirits was born, hey?
Outlaw Trail Spirits was indeed born.
So what is it that you are doing now? That's one of the reasons that we're talking.
Yeah. Well, we saw that liquor sales dropped off pretty rapidly between the beginning of March and the middle of March with the announcement of COVID-19 coming to Canada and Saskatchewan in particular. And people were scared. All of a sudden, many people were out of work and didn't have the discretionary money to spend on premium liquors. And so Charmaine and I had a heart-to-heart. She's my wife, my business partner, my best friend, and we decided that at that point, if we weren't in the hand sanitizer business, we probably weren't going to be in business for much longer. And so with that, starting, I'm going to say the second week in March, the number of phone calls that we had from everybody, including police, fire, people in the medical field at both hospitals in Regina, and members of the community absolutely desperate to get a hold of some hand sanitizer. That cemented the idea in our mind that we needed to do this, and we needed to do it as quickly as possible. And so in distillation of liquor, there is a distinct set of phases to the distillation, including what they call the heads, and they're the lower boiling point lower molecular weight components of alcohol, and include acetone and aldehydes, ketones, you name it, all the nasty stuff that tastes pretty awful in beverage alcohol and probably isn't that good for you either. And so we made 3.5 years worth of heads available to the police and others who requested it, all of which was put towards cleaning surfaces as opposed to hand sanitizer. You know, with the acetone and aldehyde content, it's not very good for you on your hands, but it is really good for disinfecting surfaces. And so we got that into people's hands right away. But then hand sanitizer, of course, is a controlled product, and you have to be licensed by Health Canada in order to produce a hand sanitizer product and label it as such. And they have some very particular requirements about cautions on labels. So we went through about a 1-month process to get that done. And by the way, I just want to give a big shout out to the folks at Health Canada. Yes, it took about a month for us to get processed, but they had thousands of applications, and we were getting calls from Health Canada anytime up to 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night, and on the weekends. And those folks just worked tirelessly to make sure that sanitizer was in the hands of people who need it.
Oh, that's amazing. So hand sanitizer, I guess, is alcohol based, and then being a distiller, you make alcohol, but they are different products, correct? So what does that transition look like for you to switch from single malts to hand sanitizer?
Well, first of all, when you're producing whiskeys or rums, you're typically ending up with product coming out of the still that's between, let's say, 70% and 85% alcohol by volume. Still has quite a bit of the aromas that you would associate with those two products, and not that it isn't high enough at 80% to qualify as a hand sanitizer, but whiskeys and rums do indeed still have some of the components remaining that you would prefer to have out if you're looking at doing hand sanitizer, mainly because the skin is such an excellent absorber of solvents like ethanol. So it's still alcohol as produced by a fermented grain product, or a fermented sugar product, or a fermented grape product. You can make ethyl alcohol out of almost anything that will actually ferment, including milk. So the big change really was in the amount of refinement associated with the alcohol. And we can get alcohol to about 91 to 93% out of the vodka still that we have at the distillery. That isn't quite the level that we want it to be at as a starting point. And so the ethanol that we end up using for hand sanitizer is actually a product that is distilled in the province by a large-scale distiller, and it is denatured with things like camphor oil and denatonium benzoate and diethyl phthalate, according to the prescribed amounts that excise requires for a DA20 denatured alcohol. And so it comes to us at about 96% alcohol by volume. It's a very, very high strength alcohol. And then we dilute it down to the 80% level. And depending on the product, we have 3 licenses with Health Canada. We're using humectants like either glycerol or propylene glycol to make it a little bit easier on your skin as a hand sanitizer. And then, of course, hydrogen peroxide, an oxidizer that does help with the disinfection process.
That's fascinating. And I think it's such a great story that you got this wonderful Saskatchewan business, and now you've just pivoted really to do such provide such a great service to Saskatchewan. But there's another part to this as well, isn't it? You don't just make it here. You actually source a lot of your products or all of your raw materials from within Saskatchewan, correct?
That's right. 100% of what goes into this hand sanitizer is sourced here in Saskatchewan, using Saskatchewan grains, soft white wheat grown out west. And, you know, I suppose it's fair to say that the yeast may be sourced elsewhere, because we don't culture yeast here in Saskatchewan, at least not large scale. Brewers certainly culture their own yeast over time, but the starting point usually comes from somewhere else, whether it's France or California. But other than that, Saskatchewan water, Saskatchewan grain, yeast, and you've got the beginnings of the grain alcohol process. At that point, to produce a grain alcohol, it has to be converted into a beer first, and not the kind of beer that you would necessarily want to drink, but when you're using grain products, the very first stage is the brewing of a beer. And what brewing is taking malted products in combination with cereal grains, and usually about up to 25% of the mash bill is a malted product, whether it's malted wheat, malted barley. And the malting process that creates the malted grain products is just simply allowing the grains to grow just a tiny bit, maybe no more than a centimeter of sprout. And at that point, the sprouts are knocked off, and the grain is then dried. And that little bit of growth creates enough enzymes in the kernel of the grain to then convert all of the starch that's in its own grain kernel and the grain kernels of the regular cereal grain kernels, convert all of that starch into sugar. And that's the very first step that's required in order to create a beer. So the process of brewing is nothing more than putting enough heat into a mash that has ground up grain along with water that's constantly circulating, and using that heat to trigger the production of the or trigger the enzymatic conversion of the starch molecules into sugar molecules. And then at that point, you can start a ferment, because now you have sugar water. And that really is the starting point to anything that you're going to distill, is a ferment.
That's really, really fascinating. And so when you get to the end of all of this, and you've got your hand sanitizer, what did you have a brand for the hand sanitizer? Could you share with us what that is?
Yeah, I sure can. So it's a little complicated of a story. When Charmaine and I decided to do the hand sanitizer thing, the one thing that we very quickly realized was that you know, our networking is pretty decent, but there is one person in the warehouse district who has enormous reach, and we needed to make sure that as many vulnerable people, vulnerable community organizations, senior homes and others had access to the hand sanitizer as quickly as possible. And the one person we knew had those connections in the community was Mark Heisey of Rebellion Brewing Company. And so late one evening, after perhaps a whiskey or two, I contacted Mark and explained to him what Charmaine and I had been talking about. And told him about the literally hundreds of calls that we had from people desperate to get some hand sanitizer by that point, and asked him if he would help out. And without hesitation, he just jumped in and said, absolutely, of course, I'm in. And so with that, we started down the path of trying to divide up duties and conquer this thing. And so the one thing that I left with Mark is labels and design of a name and all that kind of good stuff. And so the first draft name that came out, and I thought it was absolutely fantastic, was Germ Juice. And I had a good chuckle over that. He had his designer for all those terrific beer can labels. Her name is Brianna Coffin, and she's just an incredible artist. And so Brianna came up with this terrific label with the Germ Juice moniker on it, and it was great. So at that point, I knew we had to do name searches, and so I did, and voila, Germ Juice is already in existence. It is a hand sanitizer that is produced by somebody commercial, and it's been in existence for a long time. So while it was a great idea, we had to put the brakes on that. So desperate to come up with some kind of meaningful name, we looked at our company name, which is Outlaw Trail Spirits, and Mark's company name, of course, Rebellion Brewing, and there seemed to be a common thread. So with that, I just pulled a word that my grandmother used to use on me, I guess, in the interest of honesty, and it was Hooligans hand sanitizer. So check that out with Mark. He was good with it, and so that's what it became, Hooligans hand sanitizer.
Oh, I love it so much, and I think you're right. It's perfectly on brand with Outlaw Trail and Rebellion as well. So I think that's fantastic and wonderful.
Yeah, for sure.
Although, you know, I think when people think of the word hooligan, they don't necessarily think they certainly don't think of people doing great things, but can you maybe tell me how you're distributing this product?
Sure. Largely, it's self-distributing, but very kindly, Mark donated the use of his great big beer distribution truck. And so for the large-scale orders that we've had with some of the police agencies, we have distributed it in 18.9 liter pails, so 5-gallon buckets. And so sending out 40 big buckets at a time in his beer truck, and using his personnel as well. When we get deliveries of supplies of one sort or another, Mark has also very generously helped out with their forklift. We don't have a forklift. We're such a small batch distillery. We do everything by slogging grain sacks and sugar sacks around ourselves. No forklift or pallet jack. But yeah, primarily courtesy of Mark and his distribution network. And as well, with the numerous phone calls that we've had, a lot of folks come to the distillery and just pick up. And so we've been able to get it fairly widely distributed. In addition to Mark's truck, we've had very generous donations from AM Courier, and they took care of some distributions in Moose Jaw and out in Swift Current, and out in Balgony, Pilot Butte. So we've had help from all sorts of people. You just can't begin to imagine how many people have just stepped up and volunteered once they heard what we were doing. And it's absolutely a demonstration of the goodness in our community. And I've been blown away by it.
And of course, you're not charging for this product for those first responders. You're giving that product away to them.
That's right. There were some police agencies that absolutely cannot accept a donation, and so we charged them the actual cost of the bucket, and that made it so we could do what we had intended to do, and it met the spirit of what we had intended to do.
Yeah,
But outside of that, everything else was absolutely free, and it was donated by ourselves, Market Rebellion, Lisa Gibbons at the Regina Warehouse Business Improvement District, along with time and effort and supplies of all sorts donated by other members of the community. So just a real individual community effort.
So now that you've started on this process, is this the type of product that you think that you might continue to produce, that maybe you'll start to sell to the public?
Yes, absolutely. And it is, a reality for us as a business that with booze sales drying up, we're having to do things to keep the lights on and pay rent. So our plan going forward for as many months as it takes to get back to a semblance of normalcy is to sell hand sanitizer. We have no real desire to be selling it directly out of the distillery because we spend so much time making the stuff. So we have connections with significant drugstores and other retail locations to help with that distribution. And going forward, we will be continuing to make a quarter of what we produce available for donation to community organizations that can use a little help. And so one of the first organizations that we've decided to make an allotment to, by the way, is the Saskatchewan Science Centre for the auction. And so we've let Sandy know that we will be donating 250 liters of sanitizer, individual bottles, or whatever container she would like them in. And we will make that available for the auction and hopefully raise a ton of dough with it.
That is so wonderful. Thank you so much for doing that. That's so great. Thank you.
Our pleasure.
Yeah.
Our pleasure.
Is there anything that I missed, or was there anything that you thought about that maybe you'd like to add? Or
one really critical thing is, in a time like we're going through right now, science is undoubtedly going to be the most important factor in how we get through this. And, whether it's short-term measures to keep people safe, like production of hand sanitizer, sourcing of, and maybe local manufacture of personal protective equipment like gloves and masks, because suddenly the supply chains are disrupted. All of the science that goes behind development of any of those products, and of course, products that will save us long term, like vaccines, like medications that will be developed here in the next short while, antivirals and the like. All of it is absolutely dependent on people who are engaged in the practice of science and engineering. And it's always a difficult choice when you're in high school, junior high, high school, trying to make career choices for your next 30 years when you're not quite living past today. And I know that there's been a concerted effort on the part of the professional organization that I belong to, the Association of Professional Engineers and Geoscientists of Saskatchewan, to try and attract students and maybe more importantly, attract young women to science, technology, and engineering related careers. And so I just want to reinforce that it's really important to consider science and engineering as a career choice for young people. And be there for everybody in society when everything goes sideways like it has over this past few months. So anyway, that's one message that I'd like to get out there. Just go science. And the second is, over the years, you become perhaps a little bit cynical and jaded about people. And I know my grandmother used to talk about how people came together in, well, she lived through the time of the Spanish flu, followed by the Great Depression, and it stuck in her memory forever. But she used to talk about how that set of adverse circumstances really brought people together at that time, and especially people out in rural areas, people looked out for everyone else as well as themselves. And so in coming to this crisis point, the one thing that I have seen with my own eyes is the amazing selfless contributions that people have made without hesitation, without thinking about it, and more importantly, without thinking of themselves. And it has really restored my faith in humanity. And so for all of the selfish people that we've all witnessed over the years doing selfish things, this is more than made up for it. And I'm looking forward with optimism at what happens after we get out of this crisis and can move to a more normal set of circumstances with our lives. Relationships have been forged through this that will last a lifetime, and the amount of effort put in to help other people is not something that just suddenly goes away once the crisis goes away. And so I think there's going to be a refocus on people's parts with the efforts to help their fellow neighbors going forward, getting more involved in community service organizations. And that is, if nothing else good comes out of this, that is an excellent thing.
I couldn't agree more. And John, I certainly hope that you hold yourself and Outlaw Trail Spirits in those categories as well, of people that are doing amazing things to help their communities, because I definitely think that you are. So thank you for that very much.
Thank you. It's our pleasure, believe me.
So certainly on behalf of the Science Center, thank you very much for all of your past support and for your donation for our auction. But also thank you just for joining me today and having this conversation about sort of how a great Saskatchewan business is innovating and pivoting, but also a little bit about the science of hand sanitizer and distilling, and how maybe the two are actually a lot closer together, more related than people think.
Indeed. Again, my pleasure.
All right. You have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks, you too.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us here today. If you'd like to learn more about Outlaw Trail Spirits, you can find them on Facebook or Instagram at Outlaw Trail Spirits. And you can also find them on Twitter at Outlaw Trail SP. If you'd like to follow the Science Center, we're SK Science Center on Twitter and Sask Science Center everywhere else. Thanks so much and have a great day.